What's up everyone, I'm CallumOnToast, and today's video was supposed to be a Conkeldurr showcase, but Shadow Qwilfish absolutely stole the show in most of these battles. This is of course a triple buff team with Force Palm Conkeldurr, Fairy Wind Sylveon, and also Shadow Ball on both the Qwilfish and the Sylveon. Now don't get me wrong, both Conkeldurr and Sylveon feel like massive upgrades this season, but Qwilfish was just on another level. Speaking of, you can take your gameplay to another level with today's video sponsor, G Fuel. G Fuel is an energy drink aimed specifically towards gamers, and it's designed to help improve your energy levels, focus, endurance, and reaction time, which will all help to improve your overall performance when battling in the Go Battle League. Right now, there is a buy more, save more sale where the more you buy, the more savings you can unlock. By default, you actually already get 30% off your total order if you use the code Callum at the checkout, but if you buy 2 tubs, you can get 40% off as well as free energy packs and a free scooper. 4 tubs will get you 45% off your order as well as free hydration packs and a doodle band, which I actually don't know what that is, but it's free, so I guess you can't really complain. And then if you buy 6 tubs, you'll also get 50% off your total order, as well as a free pair of G Fuel socks, because I'm sure you guys have all been absolutely dying to get your hands on some G Fuel socks. Now, do note that all of these bonuses will stack, so if you do buy 6 tubs, you don't just get the free socks, you get all of the other bonus items as well. Now, you can use the link in the description or in the pinned comment of this video to take you to the G Fuel store, where you can take advantage of the buy more, save more sale. Now, before we get into the question of the day, I understand this intro has already been quite long, but I want to give a quick update regarding the Battle of Spice. In my initial announcement, the old GBL code was still the default, and I requested that people played in that format rather than on the new code, which at the time was called the Preview Cup. Since then, the new code has actually been pushed as the default, but the old code is still available under the new name of the Competitors Cup. Please, when submitting your battles, submit them in the Competitors Cup rather than on the new code, just for the sake of consistency between submissions. Anyways, with that being said, let us finally get into the question of the day. Have you played on the new code since it was pushed as the default, and what are your opinions? Let me know in the comment section down below, and with that being said, let's get into the battles now. So going into the first battle, leading Shadow Conkeldurr into Talonflame. Not the best matchup for me, so I'm going to fire off one Force Palm and then swap out into my Shadow Qwilfish. The opponent choosing to stay in here, and Qwilfish super spammy. Even with that Force Palm thrown, we can still very comfortably outpace him to the first charge move. The opponent is going to fire off their own move here. The opponent, only with resisted damage here, has already got me into the other health range, but they swap out into a Jellicent, and of course, we've got access to Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball going to grab the final shield, but the opponent over-farming, underestimating just how much energy we had. Shadow Ball number 2 gets the one shot there, and if they come back in with the Talonflame, well, they're gonna have to throw some energy, otherwise Qwilfish gonna reach yet another charge move. So the opponent fires off the flame charge this time around. We can come in with the Shadow Conkeldurr. The opponent swaps out, looking to catch a charge move, but we can now just come in with our Sylveon. It's gonna be a very neutral matchup here. The opponent is gonna fire off the Energy Ball. We can go for a Shadow Ball here, and Shadow Ball is also gonna deal some decent damage. It looks like Energy Ball with the Fairy Wind damage will just barely two-shot me. However, this is going to be a CMP tie. So Sylveon able to win CMP, Side Shot gets them fairly low, and we can just save our final shield for the Shadow Conkeldurr. We probably actually won't even need to use it here, as the opponent comes back in with the Talonflame. I go for one more Force Palm, fire off the Brutal Swing, getting the knockout there. They come back in with the Jump Bluff, and Shadow Conkeldurr able to win CMP, Brutal Swing, gets the knockout up against the Jump Bluff, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's swap on there into the next battle. We're going to see Clefable in the lead. So, we are going to swap out straight away this time around. The opponent's going to come in with a Jump Bluff. Now, last season, actually, Shadow Qwilfish, by default, probably would have been running Ice Beam as the coverage move. But now, unfortunately, because we're on Shadow Ball, we don't have the option to just completely one-shot a Jump Bluff anymore. However, we do still deal very big damage, and we can fire off yet another Shadow Ball. Now, unfortunately, I don't think Octel would have quite got the KO from that range. However, I actually don't mind double shielding here, because I realize they're in range where we can perfectly Poison Sting, farm them down, and come out with so much energy. Now, they reveal their final Pokemon to be Emolga. I'm actually going to swap out into my Conkeldurr, basically looking to bait the Clefable back out. It works perfectly. Moonblast gets the one shot there, but now we can come back in with the Qwilfish, and likely they've just used up all of their energy. So I'm going to farm up to 100 energy myself, fire off the Aquatel. Aquatel barely doesn't get the knockout, which is even more perfect for me, because now we leave with back-to-back Aquatels. First one Sylveon should be grabbing a shield here, and then actually I realized Qwilfish will be winning CMP up against the Emolga, so I'm just going to bank the energy, swap into my Sylveon where we can tank even an Acrobatics. That does do quite a lot of damage, but Sylveon actually has fairly decent bulk, and I believe this is a very high rank Sylveon, so the opponent actually can't commit to the farm down, otherwise we'd farm them down. I don't know if they've got back-to-back discharges. I'm not going to take the risk there, so we're just going to fire off the Arcatel. Arcatel, we don't need to hit any bubbles, as they're on 1 HP. We take out the Emolga, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there. Into the next battle, we're going to see Shadow Dragonite in the lead. So, at the moment, Shadow Conkeldurr not being able to catch a decent lead. But we're going to swap into our Qwilfish, and the opponent comes in with a Shadow Empoleon. Now, this is actually a matchup that I can flip here, as Shadow Ball is just going to deal so much damage. So, the fact that Poison Stings are double resisted, honestly, don't really matter. Because eventually, Shadow Ball will be enough damage to get the KO. So, I'm going to fire off the next Shadow Ball on CMP. Once again, well, actually, no, never mind. The opponent does not throw straight away. But I should still be able to reach yet another Shadow Ball. So we're going to shield here. We reach the Shadow Ball, and Shadow Ball is finally going to connect. All shields are down. Shadow Ball gets the one shot there. We flip switch advantage, which is great for us because we've got Sylveon to align into their Shadow Dragonite. Their final Pokemon going to be a Shadow Typhlosion, and unfortunately for Shadow Conkeldurr, we are just looking to sacrifice it, but the Force Palm damage is insane. That puts them into range where we can go for one Fairy Wind, fire off the Side Shock, and as long as Shadow Dragonite isn't on something like Hurricane, which they could be, I guess it was buffed this season, then we should be looking pretty fine here. The opponent goes for the charge move, but it's just a Thunder Punch, meaning we can reach a Side Shock, and Side Shock, it's non-stab damage, but it gets the knockout up against the Glassy Shadow Dragonite, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there. Into the next battle, we're going to see Malamar in the lead. Now, this is a very tricky lead matchup for me, one that I'm kind of have to just stay in this matchup here. Of course, I do expect them to go for a Foul Play, which is resisted damage. I wasn't entirely sure if I would live the Side Wave damage there to reach another charge move, or at least reach a Dynamic Punch, so I do just settle for a Brutal Swing. Looks like I barely would have got there, but I guess it doesn't really matter too much, as it does set up quite a nice farm down for my Sylveon, where, of course, the typical charge moves of Foul Play and Superpower are resisted. Then I'm going to come in with a Ludicolo. I'm going straight for Shadow Ball here, and then if this connects, I'm going to swap out into my Shadow Qwilfish. Of course, these Poison Stings are hitting for super effective damage. They're going to reveal their final Pokemon to be a Furret, which isn't the best matchup for me, because Arcatel, whilst it is going to do a lot of damage here, doesn't really put them into range where we can farm down with anything, as you're going to see right here. Now, the opponent is going to fire off a charge move of their own. The opponent going to go for a Trailblaze, boosting up their attack stat, and now I'm going to fire off the Arcatel. Arcatel is going to grab the final shield. I swap back into Sylveon, and the opponent is going to go for the combo play, coming back in with the Ludicolo. I realized I could tank a Weather Ball there. Now here, I'm actually going to go for something a little bit risky. I go for the Undercharge. That puts them into one Poison Sting farm down range, but can we reach a charge move there? Unfortunately, just barely not able to do so. Potentially, what I should have done instead was just shielded my Sylveon, and then, of course, I would have been able to live a Swift slightly better than a Weather Ball from the Ludicolo, but either way, GG's to that opponent there. Into the next battle, we see another tricky lead here for the Shadow Conkeldurr, as we're going to lead into a Tinkaton. They end up baiting with a Bulldoze, which honestly was pretty obvious, but I kind of need to shield that anyways. But we are able to grab a shield back with Dynamic Punch. There's going to be another Bulldoze here, and actually we might just barely hang on here, and we do, so I'm now going to swap into my Qwilfish. The opponent looking to catch a charge move there, but this energy is not going to be wasted, as we've got lots of energy here. Arcatel is going to two-shot them, and here I look to throw on CMP. The opponent doesn't throw immediately here, but the opponent's actually just going to fully sacrifice the Moltres, but Qwilfish still not done, reaching yet another charge move. The opponent sacrificing the Tinkaton as well. Their final Pokemon gonna be a Shadow Primeape. I realize Qwilfish wins CMP into most things. Primeape is not one of those things, but we can just catch a charge move, and that should be game over. Sylveon can tank any one move even when they are boosted, so we're going to fire off the Side Shock straight away, grab the final shield, and the opponent is going to throw their energy. We're going to no shield the first move here, as I just mentioned. Rage Fist not going to do enough damage to get the one shot, and because this is a CMP tie, I might as well shield anyways. We do have a move on the Qwilfish already, but it doesn't really matter at this point. Side Shock gets the knockout, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up in there into the next battle. I'm going to see a Shadow Ninetales in the lead. So, not the worst matchup for me, but they will very comfortably outpace me before I can reach a potential dynamic punch. So, I'm just going to bank the energy and swap into my Sylveon. The opponent is going to fire off the Weather Ball. They then swap into a Shadow Quagsire, where I'm going to fire off the Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is going to be shielded by the opponent, and the opponent is going to throw just before I reach another Shadow Ball. At this point, we're just going to let the Sylveon go down there. Conkeldurr is going to get the knockout. We can come back in with the Shadow Conkeldurr, and I should just barely live an Conkeldurr from the Shadow Quagsire and still just barely reach a dynamic punch. This is be enough damage to get the knockout. We swap into our Qwilfish, and their final Pokemon is a Shadow Feraligatr. Now, I do have to be wary because the Ninetales did leave with a Weather Ball loaded, and whilst that is resisted damage, Shadow Qwilfish is very classy. Shadow on Shadow, it probably puts me into range where they can Powder Snow farm me down. But the opponent calling a bait there, no shielding the Shadow Ball, and now Qwilfish just needs to outspam the Ninetales, and Qwilfish will be able to do exactly that. I believe they're now one away from another Weather Ball, but it doesn't matter as Shadow Qwilfish gonna be winning CMP, and once again the Conkeldurr spam is real. We take out the Ninetales, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there into the next battle. Conkeldurr just not really being able to catch a break right now. Just bad lead after bad lead after bad lead. But we're going to swap out into our Sylveon. Psyshock is going to be no shield. Unfortunately, doesn't really deal that much damage. We won't be able to two-shot them, especially if they go for Icy Wind. But this is just going to be a Swift. Now here, I should actually be able to reach 3 Psyshocks because they go for the Swift there. And of course, Charm did get nerfed this season, which means Sylveon barely hanging on. That is huge for me, as this might even grab a shield from the opponent. Now, the fact that they stayed in with the Wigglytuff probably implies that they've got a second pretty strong answer to Conkeldurr in the back, which means I'm actually going to save a lot of HP on my Qwilfish instead. And unfortunately, whilst we do have super effective damage here with the Alcatel's, Poison Sting is going to be resisted, and I'm just never going to be able to put them into range where I can farm them down. Also, these Thunder Shocks are going to add up over time. Of course, they don't deal that much damage, but it is super effective damage, and up against a Qwilfish, basically everything adds up. So we go for another Conkeldurr, we're able to force a CMP tie. I'm then going to swap out back into my Conkeldurr, except the opponent has the same idea, swapping into their Annihilate, and honestly, if we just stayed in there, we'd probably be in a good position, as I could just go straight for a Shadow Ball, get the KO, and then of course swap back into Conkeldurr. But now, unfortunately, I allow them to just fully farm me down. Rage Fist gets the knockout, and unfortunately, I lose that game. But GG's up on there into the next battle. We're going to see a Seismitoad in the lead. Now, the opponent is going to be able to outpace me to the first charge move. They can go for an Earth Power here, but I do expect them to just bait with an Icy Wind. So I'm going to no shield. They go for the Icy Wind. They then swap into a Gust Pidgeot, and I am debuffed, but I don't care. Dynamic Punch going to deal with huge damage. Unfortunately, not quite enough to put them into perfect Poison Sting farm down range, but I can just look to shield once, shield up the Twister, and then farm them down anyways. They come back in with the Seismitoad. I'm going to overfarm, farming up to back-to-back Aquatells here. First one, no shielded, gets the knockout, and their final Pokemon is going to be Magcargo, and this is already game over for the opponent. We are just super spammy. You see, we're already at back-to-back Aquatells here, and the opponent hasn't even reached a Rock Tomb yet. Now, with the Rock Tomb debuff, potentially they can live on Aquatell. I'm not entirely sure if that is the case, but either way, we're going to play it safe here. We're going to bank the Aquatell, and then going to swap into Conkeldurr, and this just guarantees that the Aquatell will get the knockout. We clear the debuff. We also land a 4th farm worth of damage. Aquatell gets the knockout as it's double super effective, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there into the next battle. We're going to see Primeape in the lead. Now, this is going to be a fine matchup here, especially if the opponent tries to force a CMP tie, which I'm not falling for because I'm just opting for the extra fast move. They're now going to swap out into Grumpig, where I can go for a Brutal Swing. Brutal Swing is super effective, and it is going to connect. We can now come in with a Sylveon, and with that Brutal Swing damage, we actually won't need to full send a Shadow Ball, and instead, we can actually just settle for a Psyshock. Psyshock, of course, is non-stab, and it is resisted damage into the Psychic typing, but from this range, it gets the knockout anyways. Now, they're still 2 away from a charge move with the Primeape, so we are just going to go for the extra Fairy Wind and then fire off the Psyshock. Psyshock is going to be shielded by the opponent as they now come in with a Fearow. Now, they do have a Rage Fist loaded on the Primeape, and they've got a bit of energy here on the Fearow, so this is still quite a tricky situation to be in. I'm going to go straight for the Aqua Tail here, and then if this does grab a shield, I should be swapping straight away into Conkeldurr. However, unfortunately for me, I'm one away from a Dynamic Punch, and they are one away from back-to-back charge moves, which means I have to settle for a Brutal Swing, but also our switch clocks are misaligned, which means the opponent, perfect play here, throwing the charge move with the Primeape, getting the knockout, and now, of course, Qwilfish, we can get the farm down, but they've now got the energy for a Drill Run. This is super effective. Drill Run gets the knockout, and unfortunately, I lose that game. But GG's up in there, very well played. Into next battle, huge core breaker to the team. Of course, this team is double weak to the psychic typing, so Pokemon like Grumpig, like Shadow Hypno are going to be an issue. But we're going to swap out into our Sylveon, and now we're met with an Umbreon, which seems quite strange, but the opponent probably recognizing that we're on Psyshock and Shadow Ball, which means actually our charge moves are completely resisted. They're also non-stab, so they don't deal much damage whatsoever. So I'm actually going to shield a Last Resort, bank 100 energy, and then come in with my Shadow Conkeldurr. Now, Last Resort is still going to do quite a lot of damage, but our switch clocks are massively misaligned. I'm hoping to farm them down, but unfortunately they do reach a last-second foul play. So I'm going to shield here, and of course, if they come back in with the Hypno, we've got back-to-back Brutal Swings. Unfortunately, I will only be able to go for one, as a single Confusion gets the knockout. But remember, Sylveon, loaded on energy. We've already got 100 energy here. We go for one Fairy Wind anyways, just because we might as well throw it on good timing. Shadow Ball is not quite going to get the knockout, but it does get them incredibly low. They're not going to reach another charge move, and their final Pokemon is going to be Pangoro. Now, they've only seen Shadow Ball so far, so the opponent ends up shielding there, which means now we can come in with the Qwilfish. We're resisting the Karate Chop damage. We can go straight for Aqua Tail. Aqua Tail is going to hit for neutral damage, but it gets the knockout, and we can just Poison Sting, farm down the Shadow Hypno to take that game. So, GG's up on there is the next battle. We're going to see Empoleon in the lead. So, finally, a really good matchup for the Conkeldurr. The opponent is going to be safe swapping into Primeape, and I realize this might actually be their potential bait out of a Fairy-type Pokemon, because usually Empoleon is paired with Altaria in the back. In which case, honestly, not the best case scenario for me, but either way, we're still in a good position here, as Shadow Ball is going to deal respectable damage here, and if the opponent tries to commit to a full farm down, I will actually reach yet another charge move. The opponent actually shields the first Shadow Ball, and then they also throw some energy here. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure if I would have reached another Shadow Ball, but either way, that is absolutely fine with me. I'm going to come in with the Conkeldurr. I'm going to use my shield, as the opponent is going to go for the Drill Peck, and they do reveal their final Pokemon to be the Altaria. Now here, I am going to go for a Brutal Swing, because Shadow Ball is not going to be enough damage to get the knockout. Whereas now, with a few more Poison Stings, Shadow Ball should actually get the KO. So we're going to shield the Sky Attack. I'm now going to look to overfarm massively with the Qwilfish and throw just before I am reaching back-to-back charge moves. I'm not going to bait. Shadow Ball is going to be no-shielded. They come back in with the Empoleon, and at this point, they do have to start shielding. So this time around, I will be baiting. Aqua Tail grabs the final shield. The opponent needs to overfarm, but in doing so, we reach another Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball gets the knockout, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there. Into the next battle, we're going to see Azumarill in the lead. So, I'm going to be swapping out straight away. Well, trying to swap out straight away into my Sylveon. However, unfortunately, I do end up throwing one Force Palm first, because I don't know why. I guess we're just lagging a lot here. Either way, the opponent going to go for an Aqua Tail on the CMP tie, which unfortunately, we end up losing there. Now, potentially, I should have overfarmed, baited, like potentially I had a Moonblast to throw. However, it doesn't really matter too much, because they probably would have no-shielded regardless. And the opponent also goes for the Aqua Tail there, getting the KO. Now, unfortunately, we're already lagging. We're actually going to get, like, not even one, like, that was like 2-turn bring-in lag there, which allows them to reach an Aqua Tail very comfortably before we farm them down. And unfortunately, they're just basically hard countering us. We can go for an Aqua Tail here. Of course, Morpeko going to be using a shield there, and they can just start going straight for Psychic Fangs. Psychic Fangs going to be dropping my defense, and eventually, but if the opponent does not need to throw any more energy whatsoever, they can just simply shield once, or shield twice, I guess, and then go for a full Thundershock farm down. Now, even though we did lag at the start and in the mid game here, I don't think it really makes any difference, because we still didn't be able... what the hell? I can't even talk. We still weren't able to flip switch advantage or have the alignment that we needed, and so as a result, we end up losing anyways. But GG's to opponent there. Into the next battle, we're going to see a great lead for us, and even better, the opponent is going to swap into a Shadow Steelix, where Conkeldurr still has an absolutely great time against. Now, the opponent is going to be shielding a Brutal Swing. I might as well just stay in here. I'm reading it's probably going to be a Fairy type in the back. Might be Carving, might be Wiggly. Wigglytuff, might be something else. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But either way, I am going to wait to see what comes in. The opponent comes in with a Wigglytuff, so we're going to come in straight away with our Shadow Quillfish. Potentially I should have swapped into my Sylveon there, but either way, I guess it doesn't really matter, because Quillfish can still deal a lot of damage in this matchup here, as we're already at back-to-back Aqua Tails. First one grabs a final shield, second one does big damage. The opponent can actually commit to a full farm down, however, it doesn't really matter. Conkeldurr is now going to have access to a Dynamic Punch, so I'm going to shield. They actually go for Crunch, which is quite an interesting play there, probably just assuming I'd come in with my final Pokemon. Either way, Dynamic Punch does huge damage. They can't KO me with any one charge move, so Sylveon, Fairy Wind farms them down, and I'm able to take that game. So GG's up on there into the final battle of this video, leading into a Shadow Sableye. So back to the pretty tricky lead matchups for the Conkeldurr. We're going swapping out, and the opponent actually comes in with a Grumpig, which is honestly quite fine for me, as we can go straight for Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball does big damage, and potentially, if I shield once, if they do full send the Shadow Ball here, I should just be able to Fairy Wind farm them down. The opponent, they might make a Dynamic Punch, but no, they don't even throw that, and that is absolutely huge for me. They're now going to come in with a Tinkaton, which would have been a much better answer to my Sylveon, but now I'm going to swap back into Conkeldurr. I'm actually planning on not shielding anything. If they full send the Gigaton Hammer, then fair play, and they do exactly that. But now we can come in with our Shadow Quillfish, and we're going to be in a great position. Remember, we do have a Charge Move loaded on the Sylveon already. I don't think we quite got a Shadow Ball loaded, but we do at least have a Side Shock already. We can go for a bait there with the Aqua Tail. The opponent is going to fire off a Charge Move of their own. I'm going to shield here. The opponent does full send the Foul Play rather than going for a Drain Punch. This time around, I am going straight for Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball, gotta connect. It gets the KO there. They come back in with the Tinkaton, and I can go straight for an Aqua Tail. Now, they do have the energy for a Bulldoze, but I'm going for the combo play. We didn't quite have the energy for the Shadow Ball, but one more Fairy Wind does the job. Shadow Ball gets the knockout, and I'm able to take that game. So that's going to be it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please make sure you leave a like, leave a comment letting me know, and as well, don't forget to respond to the question of the day if you haven't done so already. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. Now, if you want to take your support to the next level, you can become a channel member with perks including early access to new videos, shoutouts at the end of each video, custom loyalty badges, and custom emojis to use in the comments of every video. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone that has become a channel member already. Your support is greatly appreciated. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching today's video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.